Let's get perspective now from Richard Johnson, who lectures U.S. politics and international relations at Lancaster University, joining us this hour. It's good to have you on the show to talk about the midterm elections coming up Tuesday. A lot of excitement around it here in the States, as you can imagine. And in contrast, we're seeing two different messages in this divided electorate. The President of the United States focusing on fear around the migrant caravan that he says is coming to invade the United States. We know that that is not the case. Democrats running against xenophobic, divisive messages, essentially running against the president his last 2 years. Which is the greater motivator here for voters?
Well, midterm elections are base elections, and it's about motivating your core supporters. And so both sides really are not speaking to try and really bring many people over from the other side. They're there to try and motivate high turnout. And we're starting to see now the data of early voting turnout, which is much higher than 2014, although 2014 was at historic low. But some states' turnout is actually matching some presidential election year early voter turnout. I was looking at Texas this morning, and Texas now early voting is equivalent to what it was in the 2012 presidential election, which is really remarkable for a midterm election where every midterm election you usually get fewer than 50% of Americans turning out to vote at all. And in Texas, already 40% of eligible voters have voted early. So that's really quite a remarkable measure of how both sides, I think, are motivated in this election.
You know, I was speaking to some friends back in my home state of independent voters, and you do get a sense that they are considering casting a vote the other way toward Beto O'Rourke, a difference from what they've done before, mainly casting votes for Republican candidates. It is an interesting energy there in Texas. We'll see where it goes. But independent voters, we just heard a moment ago our Randy Case speaking to several of them. It really comes down to whether those independents are swayed for or against the president.
Well, it's interesting. I was looking at the Democrats' lead among self-identified voters. It's about 9%, but that's actually in the last month gone down 5 percentage points. Now, it's not unusual in any election for the polls to tighten as election day approaches and people give another look at the candidates. But, you know, again, I think that, you know, although it's important for the Democrats to have that lead and the Republicans are really on the defensive in so many House seats, that we also need to think about the situation in the Senate where these national polls are not so helpful because it's really not a national election. It's only a third of the country voting. And in those states, the situation is much trickier for the Democrats. There are a lot of states on which the Democrats now are on the defensive, which is very different from the situation in the House. And so to win those states, we need to look at the state level polling data rather than the national level polling data, which the national level polling data looks pretty good for the Democrats.
You do describe the map, you know, quite accurately, considering the races for House of Representatives across the United States. The Democrats have a better shot there. When it comes to the Senate, there is a possibility, but it is a much more uphill you know, run for them to take control of the Senate. It does all come down, though, to the question of who shows up to vote. Should Democrats regain both chambers of Congress, what would that mean for the U.S. president over the next 2 years of his term?
Well, the president would be able to continue to make some policy changes through the executive branch. That's how President Obama governed for the latter half of his presidency, and we've seen President Trump use the powers of the presidency over the executive branch to, say, reverse various decisions that President Obama made through the Justice Department about incarceration and voting rights and so on. So this isn't the end of Trump being able to pursue his agenda, but it certainly makes a legislative agenda for the president extremely difficult. But if he holds on to the Senate, then things like executive branch appointments and crucially judicial appointments remain in his power. And so the Senate really is a very big prize that if the Democrats fall short on, Trump can still make quite a lot of transformative policy changes by installing his judges on the federal courts, and that could have decades-long implications.
Richard Johnson joining us in Lancaster, England. Thank you again for your time and perspective. We'll keep in touch.